that up at the moment. So welcome everyone. Aztec is very pleased to be able to bring you this webinar. It's the first of many that we'll be offering. We're also going to be offering online training, and you'll get more information about that from our website and from your contact people later on. So the slides will be shared, Chundi. We will make those available at the end of the webinar. So you don't have to write anything down. You can sit back and relax. There's not a lot of slides, but there's a few slides that we'll be using. And so you'll be able to get access to those slides as you need it. So again, welcome everyone. There's a few more people joining. Just to let you know what we're going to be doing, what we're going to be covering. We're going to be covering 4 areas in the time we have today, which will be about an hour, and there'll be a Q&A session at the end. It looks like Dipri is not getting sound. I think everyone is getting sound. If you're not getting sound, you may have it muted on your computer. You should have a look at that and check that your computer is not muted. One of the things about webinars and online training is the technical problems that can arise. People are getting used to this as there are more meetings being held online and people are getting used to training and webinars. Anyway, Dipre, have you got sound now? I think everyone else can hear me. If I could just check, Gerald and Khalid, can you all hear me? Mary, if you want to just tap in the, type into the chat box. Yep, so everyone's hearing me there. So it's something at your end. And it's recording here. Good. Thank you, Anne. Thank you. Yeah. Possibly. More likely that it's try using a headset as well. If you're having trouble hearing, just plug your phone headset into the computer. That might help. So, for those who can see the slide, you'll see what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be covering what is mental health. We're going to look at the impact of crisis and trauma. We're going to learn how to look after your mental health and then be aware of the support services that are available to other people. Let's get going and think about this idea of mental health. What is it? Why is it an issue, and what can we do about it? And how does something like the pandemic have an impact on people? I think the first thing to think about here is, what is mental health anyway? What is it? What does it mean? Why do we even have something called mental health? I mean, fundamentally, there is no difference between physical health and mental health. That's on a purely technical, biological basis. There is no difference. However, in most cultures, and particularly in certain cultures, such as mine, Scottish culture, but we'll find this in other cultures as well, getting gap between the physical and the mental is incredibly large, and most people tend to be okay talking about having a physical health problem. If you suddenly are diagnosed with diabetes, or if you were unfortunately to be diagnosed with one of the cancers, you would probably tell your friends and family, come in and tell people at work. They may even be fundraising for you. People will wear badges or armbands. On the other hand, if it came to having a mental health problem, most of us and most people would find it incredibly difficult to talk about that. Most people would find it almost impossible to tell other people, maybe even their family members. If we look at what mental health actually is, the World Health Organization says it's a state of well-being in which every individual realizes their own potential. They can cope with the normal stress of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and they can make a contribution to their community. That's what it means to have good mental health. We all have mental health. Let's just keep that very clear. Every single one of us has mental health. And just like our physical health, it can be different throughout different times of the month, but also the year and our life. There are times when our mental health is feeling very positive and times when it's very negative. At the moment, with what's going on in the world, many people are finding that their mental health has been affected. This could be for many reasons, and we'll look at what some of them are. But in relation to the pandemic, we have a number of key issues. The first one being that if you have an existing mental health problem, it could be exacerbated by being in lockdown, financial worries, concerns about your job, concerns about family members being ill, yourself being ill. So this will have a major impact on your mental health. This is normal and to be expected. But it's also true that a lockdown, a pandemic, a worldwide restriction on your normal activities can affect your mental health significantly. When it comes to mental health, it's important to remember that, first of all, having mental health doesn't just mean you don't have a mental disorder. Just like having a physical health is not described by us as being, well, I don't have cancer, I don't have gout, I don't have diabetes. We don't say that normally, but when it comes to mental health, we often feel that it's about not having a mental disorder, and that's not true. We need to remember that every one of us and every one of our employees have a mental health. It's an integral part of your health. You don't have health if you don't have mental health. In fact, if you had no mental health, you would not be alive. The measurement of brain activity is one of the ways we measure whether people are alive or not. And in fact, your mental health is determined by a number of factors. These include your socioeconomic factors, biological and environmental. Simply your DNA and your upbringing, where you were born, your current socioeconomic background, things that have happened to you in the past, these are all going to impact on your mental health. But it's also vitally important to remember that there are strategies to promote, protect, and restore your mental health. So I think the first point that we want to understand in this webinar is that mental health is not different from physical health. They are two sides of the same coin, and that coin is you as a person. It's also important to remember that mental health is something which brings with it, in many cultures, a lot of embarrassment, a lot of concern. People find it difficult to talk about. We need to break down those barriers. Many celebrities in the past couple of years, including Prince William of the United Kingdom, Lady Gaga, David Beckham, a number of people have come forward discussing their own mental health concerns and their own mental health problems. And this has helped many people talk about it. In fact, we know that the younger generation, Generation Z, as we call them, the young people leaving school, going to college and entering the workplace, are much more comfortable at talking about their mental health than people who are older. So when it comes to our mental health, it's also worth remembering that certain events can cause us problems with our mental health. And that includes a crisis or a trauma. So what is a trauma or a crisis? Well, a trauma occurs when your normal assumptions about the world being a safe place is challenged. And this causes in every human being a psychological crisis. This is an injury to your inner world. Your core assumptions are shattered by the traumatic experience. Be this a tsunami, an earthquake. I personally worked on the earthquakes in China, which involved tens of thousands of people dying and having their lives shattered. This could be someone who's involved in a car accident, terrorism, robbery, death, near-death experiences. But there is no doubt at all that what the world is going through at the moment is a collective trauma and crisis. Many people thought that this was not going to happen. We all saw that in the first few weeks and months of the crisis, people were thinking, well, that's just a problem for old people or the sick. It's no worse than the flu. This is a problem for the Chinese. But as the world has seen the death toll increase, huge measures for flattening the curve happen, where people being quarantined, people being kept in their home. I'm in the UK and we're only allowed to go out for very special reasons, once a day for exercise. If you're an emergency or critical worker, you can leave your home and with other people if they need to get food products. But what we've seen is that this crisis, this trauma, has affected everyone on the planet. There's probably very few people who aren't being affected. I was talking to someone yesterday whose family is on one of the small Pacific islands, somewhere where we often don't think about people being worried about something like this, but they've already had several serious cases, but even more so, 12 months ago, they had a outbreak of measles, mumps, which killed many people on the island. And this event is now triggering that event for people. So I think that we're all in this together. We're all experiencing issues. So when we experience a trauma or a crisis, we all react differently. This has to do with many individual psychological and biological factors. This could be your previous experiences. This could be have to do with the past experiences you've went through in your life, your resilience. It has to do with how the impact affects you. One of the things we know about traumatic events is that for every person, this is a normal reaction to an abnormal event. We can experience sleep problems, worry and anxiety, lethargy and fatigue, feeling tired all the time, anger. Now, this anger can be misdirected. You can find yourself getting angry at people for no reason, people who don't actually cause you any reason to be angry. You find yourself hitting out at them. Now, this is a major problem if you're locked down with people in a house where normally you could get out, go for a walk, go to the gym, go to the movies. You may find yourself experiencing headaches, excessive smoking, drinking, and eating. Major problem. We'll look at smoking and drinking later on. But already people who have been locked down are finding themselves potentially eating more, eating less healthy. People may find themselves smoking more than they should. And smoking and vaping has got a fundamental problem when it comes to the coronavirus, because if you get the virus and have respiratory problems, a history of smoking and vaping can make the matters worse. panic attacks, and there are many other reactions. So the important thing, though, the most important thing to remember, the second most important point here, is that what you are experiencing is a normal reaction to an abnormal event. So let's think about the pandemic. Let's think about what's happening here. By the way, I can see from the chat that a couple of people are having issues. If other people see people chatting and asking questions, feel free to respond to them. If someone could let Depri know that we're videotaping this so he'll be able to watch it back later. And Mohammed, if your video is frozen, it's probably because of your internet connection. Good idea to not have anything else running on your computer while you're streaming a webinar. But also, you're probably aware of the fact that there are the load on internet systems is huge because so many people are at home. They're streaming movies, Netflixing and chilling. I know that my internet connection at home is for when I'm trying to watch Netflix or one of the online streamers is actually slow. So let's continue here. Let's think about what happens during the pandemic itself. What are the key issues that we need to keep in mind here? What can you do? Well, there are a few things that you need to do. First of all, fundamentally, you need to limit the news and social media that you're using. There is absolutely danger involved in getting yourself hooked on news stories, media, conspiracy theories, trying to make sense of a confusing situation by turning to the World Wide Web. I know it's tempting. I found myself doing exactly the same thing, but what I've done is limited how much I look at this each day. For a look, I don't have any way of moving the video. That's a feature of ClickMeeting. If you expand to full screen, there's a button on your screen for full screen. It might help you see what happens. Okay, so what I was saying is that social media, Facebook, WhatsApp groups, these can be very dangerous at this time. It can give you more anxiety, more stress. It's also really important to make sure that you're only looking at trustworthy news sites. Be very careful. This can make your mental health worse. It's also important to talk about your fears and worries. Talk to people you can trust. Guess what? The telephone still works. And a telephone is an incredibly good way of talking to other people. Call people you haven't called for a while. Have a chat about your worries and fears. What you're going to find is that many people share exactly the same fears that you have. Many people are going through the same concerns. Shared trauma requires shared communication. Please try to do that if you can. Stay connected with other people. If you're working from home, if you're isolated, still try to stay connected. Do this through video chat, FaceTime, WhatsApp groups. As long as people aren't spending all their time about conspiracies and looking at every issue around whether a face mask works or not, try to talk to people about normal things. If you can, consider helping and supporting other people. Here in the United Kingdom, they asked for volunteers to help the NHS. Over 500,000 people volunteered in the first 2 days. 500,000 people. Now, this is very nice. It's going to really help a lot of people, but it's going to help those people who are volunteering. Think about doing something good for someone around you. If you're going shopping, maybe ask your neighbor. I spoke to someone yesterday who told me that he posted on a local Facebook group that he was willing to help other people in his neighborhood. He got a message from an elderly lady who was self-isolating. He offered to do shopping for her. He found out she lived across the road from him, and they both lived there for more than 15 years and never talked to each other. And now he's talking to her each day on the telephone. He's doing shopping for her, and even is helping out with other issues that she needs help with. This is going to help the other person, of course, but it will help you. Look after your physical health and your sleep. This is not a time to be drinking more, using recreational drugs. If your sleep is being affected, look at some of the sleep apps. Read online about how you can get help with your sleeping. Continue to exercise. There are great online exercise classes. Do those. Point 6 on my list of 10 things to do is to set short-term mini goals. This is not a time to be setting goals for the next 2 years. This is not a time to be looking at what's going to happen to you in the future. Set your goals for what's going to happen today, what's going to happen this week. Short goals, short-time goals, goals that are achievable, these are going to help you incredibly in dealing with your mental health. It's also important to do things that you enjoy and keep your mind active. If you enjoy computer gaming, get online and do your computer games. If it's just that you like to play chess or Go, then join online groups where you can play that with other people. Maybe this is the time to do that jigsaw puzzle or build that model airplane you've always thought of doing. Keep your mind active. Keep yourself doing things that you enjoy. It's also important to keep up the activities that you may have developed in the past around mindfulness and meditation and prayer. This is a good time for you to do an audit of your own spiritual and mental health. But we know for a fact, as scientifically proven, that people who use mindfulness, meditation, and prayer during times of crisis experience less physical and mental health issues. If you can, and if you're allowed, get out once a day. This could be for a short walk. Doesn't mean you have to go jogging or running. Just a little walk outside will be really helpful. And finally, point 10. If you find yourself in a crisis situation or one of your employees is in a crisis situation, seek professional help. Professional counseling is available online. Most counselors are now offering online counseling, but there are also emergency services available for people who need it. So let's move on. Remember to put any questions into the Q&A mode. If you would like to ask questions as we go, I will see them and I will answer them. So during an issue like the pandemic, and by the way, this applies to any crisis situation, but during the pandemic, there are certain things that we need to be careful about. These are what I would call the hot points. These are things where people may find themselves not coping where they normally would. And a good example would be where people's normal coping mechanisms are cancelled. For example, maybe you're a person who goes to the gym every day. I know workers, employees who go to the gym for 2 or 3 hours every day after work. Those people do that because it helps them cope with life. The fact they can't go to the gym is not just an issue of not being able to lift weights. It's an issue of a coping mechanism being removed from them. This can cause additional trauma. We also have the problem for people who've experienced previous trauma in their life, be that child abuse in their young age, be it someone who's been through other crises like earthquake or tsunami or disaster, bushfires, be it someone who has experienced a traumatic event through war or terrorism. Those people may find themselves at this time being triggered. Many years ago, quite a few of you may remember when Lady Diana died in Paris in the car accident. And at the time, I was working as a psychologist in Australia. And one of the things that amazed us was how many people were upset about Lady Diana. There were people crying, having panic attacks, people experiencing major trauma. And many people were saying, well, why? They don't know her. She's thousands of miles away. How could they be so upset? Well, the answer to that is very simple. There's two key reasons. One, the experience allowed many people to connect with other traumas in their life. For example, one close friend of mine had lost her brother in a car accident many years before, but had never grieved. But when Lady Diana had been killed, she found herself grieving uncontrollably. But this was really her tapping into what had happened to her in her childhood with her brother. But also, the Lady Diana incident brought forward for many people traumas they'd had in their life. And when they saw other people being upset, this gave them the freedom to open up about their own emotions. You see, we have this problem for many people, unfortunately for men more than women in general, and for certain cultures, Middle Eastern, Scottish, African, we often find that emotions are seen as taboo for certain people, men, certain professionals. So therefore, they don't get to tap into that. And events like this can bring up a whole bunch of feelings which are very unusual for people. But also, people who have gone through trauma in their life may find themselves experiencing their trauma reactions again. We call this being triggered. It's also important that during a crisis such as the one we're having now, many people are having financial crises and hardship. People have lost their job or worried about losing their job. They don't know where the money's coming from. This can be a particular hotspot for people. Again, it's vital to get good advice at this stage, vital to talk to other people. We also have a problem with people, and this happens with all traumatic events and crisis, people often increase their alcohol and other drug use. People may find themselves turning to prescription or recreational drugs at this time, find themselves smoking more, vaping more, using shisha more. This is dangerous and not something that people should be doing. You need to keep an eye on your recreational drug use. Alcohol and other drugs are not going to make things better for you. They have potential of making things worse. If you find yourself in a problem in this area, you need to seek professional help. We also know that domestic violence and abuse can increase during trauma. And for many people, this is a major issue at the moment because they may be having to self-isolate or quarantine with the abuser. Here in the UK, we've had major issues which have been reported in the media and by government, where women who are being violently abused by their domestic partner are finding themselves trapped in that situation. So we're having to look at emergency care and help. If you have employees who are being forced to work at home and you notice or they talk to you about these issues, you may have to look at additional help for those people. And we'll cover that shortly in the presentation. The last one I want to mention, number 6, is online gambling. Gambling is a form of addiction, and many people can find themselves getting addicted to gambling. But the problem is, at the moment, while people are at home and living the internet life, they may find themselves turning to online gambling as simply as a form of entertainment, and then find themselves chasing the losses. Unfortunately, some of the unscrupulous people out there have been promoting online gambling during this time of crisis. I've actually noticed myself that I've been getting several emails daily, which I wouldn't normally have received, which go into my spam filter, spam box, but they're all about online gambling, trying to encourage people. So be very careful about that issue. It's a hotspot. Number 7 on the list, was other. So there could be other hotspots that you've thought about. If you have, put them into the chat window now and we can discuss them further. So, thank you. So at the moment, we've talked about some of the particular hotspots, but this presentation is not just about you, it's about looking after your employees or people that you love and care for. So how do you know if someone's experiencing a mental health issue? I mean, that's a fundamental question. In fact, at Aztec Training, we have a course called Mental Health First Aid. And this actually trains up first aid mental health responders in your workplace to help people who are experiencing a crisis. But the first thing that I would say to you is that you often won't know. You won't know that someone's experiencing a problem. Many people are very good at hiding their mental health issues. And even people very close to them may never know. I know of a case with a person I was doing executive coaching with who had been diagnosed with a serious mental health issue. He was a professional man, and his own wife didn't know that he was going through the mental health issues, even though they were close and shared most things. So the first point is that you may not know, and you can't do anything about that. But let's look at some of the ways that it's possible to know if someone's experiencing a mental health issue. What are some of the ways that we can know? Well, the first point I want to make is that only a trained professional can diagnose someone. You should not try to diagnose someone's condition. Do not go to the internet, look up mental health symptoms, type them in, and then say, oh, well, this person definitely has schizophrenia or anxiety disorder or whatever it might be. This is not helpful. It's most likely going to be hurtful and certainly will probably be inaccurate. The diagnosis of mental health disorders is very complex. It can take multiple sessions and testing before a good diagnosis can be given. So just like for physical issues, it's not a good idea to be talking to people about their physical health problems by diagnosing them using websites. The same applies to mental health. This doesn't mean that there aren't things you can look out for in your family, your friends, your children, and your employees. I do want to stress at this point that occupational health is about physical and mental health, and that an employer is just as responsible for people's physical health and mental health equally. Unfortunately, many employers will be quite concerned about physical health and will put in special breathing systems and eye wash stations and have safety equipment. But when it comes to mental health, we often are lacking in our response. It is a responsibility of every employer, HR professional, and occupational health professional to look at people's physical and mental health. And we'll talk about what you can do specifically as an employer shortly. So the first point was that only a trained professional can diagnose someone. The second point, whether it's someone you're close to, a family member, employee, someone that you know, a friend or colleague, if you notice a change in their mood, their behavior, their habits, or personality, a mental health reason could be what's going on. It's possible. It could be a possible reason. In fact, it's very important to see that as a possibility. Now, of course, we're going through a worldwide crisis at the moment. So people are not going to be acting normally, whatever normal is. People are going to be more upset, more stressed, more worried, more overloaded than they have been. That is normal. That is to be expected. In fact, it would be reasonable to say that someone who is acting like everything is fine and nothing has changed and they're not worried at all, that person is more likely to be experiencing inner problems than the person expressing it. But a change in behavior can be an indication, a change in mood, a change in habits can be an indication that people are experiencing mental health issues. One of my colleagues talked to me recently about their child who loves online gaming. And she assumed that during the lockdown, where the child can't go to school, they're just doing a few hours online each day, that they would be enjoying their computer gaming more than ever. She's always telling them to get off the Xbox. What's actually happened, though, is the child has stopped gaming. Now, while in normal circumstances, she might be very happy about that. That looks like what she wanted, the child to be doing less computer gaming and more reading of good books. But this is an abnormal reaction. I suggested she sit down and have a proper discussion with her child, which she did. And she then found out that the child had been reading stuff online and was convinced that his mother and father were going to die. His father has diabetes, his mother had a history of having some health problems. So the child was actually working through by themselves concerns about both their parents dying. And this is really important. So having a talk to that child at this stage, having a serious talk to your children about their worries and concerns is vitally important. Now, those who have done training with me before will know that I often talk about the importance of monitoring your children's social media and internet usage. That is more important now than ever, because there is a lot of nonsense on the internet. There is a lot of people who get off on trolling other people. In my book, Communication Genius, I talk about trolling and the people who enjoy trolling other people on the internet. And this is often linked to their own psychopathology. They enjoy instilling fear and anxiety in other people. And those people have come out now more than ever. They're finding the coronavirus an opportunity to disturb people, to scare people. So, I mean, I saw recently on one WhatsApp group for young people where someone was posting photos actually of an incident that took place 10 years ago, but was showing these photos of dead bodies and telling people this was what was happening locally. And this was young people, 10 to 13, 14 years of age watching it. So as a parent, talk to your children about what's going on, talk to them about their fears, but also don't be scared to talk to your employees. But remember that everyone is different. One of the problems with mental health compared to physical health is the difficulty in diagnosing, the difficulty that everyone can present very different symptoms. If you go to your doctor and you start talking to your doctor about problems you're having with your knee, he will probably do a physical exam. If he can't see anything, he might send you for an X-ray or an MRI. And then they may even take blood samples, urine samples, and from that they can diagnose what's going on with your knee. Is it arthritis? Is it gout? Is it that you've torn a ligament? When it comes to mental health, this is a much more complex area. It's much more difficult to diagnose people. It's much more difficult because, for many reasons, but one of the key reasons is that people often present with very different symptoms. This is about people being complex. There is no simple answer. There is no simple way of diagnosing someone or saying that person's behavior is abnormal. And then we have the added problem that during the pandemic that we're experiencing now, we're all experiencing a shared crisis and trauma. So we need to be very careful. Look, I saw your question and I will answer that in the Q&A. So let's look at the last one. And this is related to the question you just asked there online, Luke. And I'll say to everyone else, if you've got questions, post them. We've got about 20 minutes left in this webinar. So we'll have time at the end for Q&A or comments. Learn to talk and listen effectively. Any of you who have done training courses with my colleague Gerald, who's online from Kuala Lumpur, who runs great courses on communication. If you've done courses on communication or interviewing with me or with other Aztec trainers, you probably would have covered active listening, how to be a better questioner, use of open and closed questions. All of this is vital. You need to use those skills at this time, whether it's talking to employees or family members or your children. If I was going to give you a quick tip, and I'm not a great quick tip person, but if I was giving a quick tip, it would be to remember the 70-30 rule. What's the 70-30 rule? Let me try something different here. I'm going to try using the whiteboard. I'm not sure this will work, but we'll give it a go. So 70-30 rule. Yeah. My whiteboard working? Interesting. Okay. No, it's not going to work for me. Anyway, I was only going to write 70-30 up, so it doesn't really matter. The 70-30 rule is it's a simple rule to remember. That is that when you're talking to someone about something serious, whether this is an employee, partner, your children, you should be listening 70% of the time, and they should be talking 70% of the time. We often get that round the wrong way. When we're talking to an employee or to our children or to someone else, we often find that we're talking and not listening. You simply can't talk and listen at the same time. So this is a great time to practice your listening skills. It's very important that we're listening to other people. So let's go back and look at that list again. So how do you know? First of all, you probably won't. But it's also possible to notice changes in people's behavior. There is nothing wrong in talking to people about changes in their behavior. If it's someone you're close to, you can say to them, look, you seem to be eating more than you normally do, or you normally like to play cards, but you haven't wanted to play cards for the last 3 days. It's reasonable to have that conversation with someone close to you. But do remember that everyone is different and that people will have very many different symptoms. When I started training people in mental health 20 odd years ago, I used to have a lot of HR people who would ask me, tell us the signs, what are we looking for? What should we see? Well, that's too simplistic. It's not healthy. It's not appropriate. When it comes to managers and supervisors, a drop in someone's work performance is often a very good indication that something's going on in their life. So monitoring work performance is something you can do. So let's talk about what you can do. How do you get help? What are the options for getting help? Well, let's look at some of these options now. First of all, psychological interventions, counseling, psychotherapy, these are effective. There is multiple meta-analysis and research being done over the last 30 years to show that psychological interventions do help people when they're having mental health issues. We have a problem that in many cultures, unfortunately, there is a lot of stigma and bias connected to people getting help. Some people's health insurance doesn't cover psychological health, even though it covers physical health. Some people don't have access to counseling. In some countries, it's much harder to find a therapist than others. If you're in the United Kingdom or the United States, you may find it much easier to find a good counselor. That can be much more tricky in the United Arab Emirates or in Nigeria. But good help is available. I also will point out that the online counseling can be very effective. This can be by telephone or by using secure video conferencing. And there is a lot of evidence to show that that type of counseling can be just as effective as face-to-face. The big advantage of that type of counseling is that it goes across borders. So this may be very useful for people who are seeking help. Just be careful to make sure that the counseling you're getting is from someone who's accredited and licensed by their country. Here in the United Kingdom, you're looking for someone who is a member of the UKCP or the BACP. That's the United Kingdom Counselling and Psychotherapy Association. And you want to be checking that those people are licensed and accredited. This is very important because unfortunately we have charlatans and scam artists offering their help. I do say that while most people offering services are professional, there are many who aren't. So be careful, look to professional bodies, make sure that the people have accreditation. If you are getting help and it's being covered by your health insurance, most of the health insurers have checked the licensing of people who provide help. I do have to say this, though, that it's possible at this time you might have to pay for that help. Here in the UK, if you wanted to get counselling and psychotherapy through the government, you may have a several-month waiting list. Whereas if you're prepared to pay, you can probably have help right away. I guess that's an issue for everyone to weigh up how important their mental health is to them, whether they're prepared to pay or can pay. The other thing I want to mention now, which is really important for every employer on this webinar or anyone who watches this back later, your organization should have in place right now an employee assistance program or an EAP. If you don't have one, set one up. Employee assistance programs offer free, professional, confidential counseling to all employees and members of their immediate family. 95% of the top 1,000 organizations in the world and close to 100% of government organizations in the UK, America, Australia have these in place. And they have them in place for a good reason. EAPs have been in operation for more than 30 years. And they allow employees to speak to a counsellor in person or on the telephone or by video about any issue they're having. For a small fee each year, the employer has this service available to their employees. These are available in Africa, Indonesia, China, the Middle East. These programs are available now, and many good employers have them in place. It's important to first check out whether you have one in place. You may be surprised to have it. Recent research that I did found that over 80% of employees often don't know that they have access to an EAP, even though their employer is paying for it. If you don't have one of these in place, look at setting it up now. This is vital. Every employee needs that access. Now, the advantage of the EAP, and the research on this is very clear, that for every $3 you spend on your EAP, for every dollar that you spend on your EAP, the return on investment is $3 or more. So these will pay for themselves. They are not an expensive program to have in place, but you're going to allow your employees to have access to counseling that they never had before. This is a benefit, and in fact, if you look at many online job ads, you'll find that access to an EAP is listed. But many employees, and increasingly younger employees, see an EAP as a very important benefit. Talk to your health provider if you have an insurance system. Find out whether the EAP is available. If not, ask them to make sure that it is, or go to an independent EAP provider. The international body for EAPs is the Employee Assistance Professionals Association, EAPA, and you can go to their website and get all the information that you need, and also the links to who are the providers, accredited providers in your country. So employee assistance programs, vital, much easier. Now, by the way, if you have an EAP, this means you don't have to know who to refer people to. You don't have to check out if they're qualified. If you don't have an EAP and you're referring an employee, you're going to have a duty of care to make sure that who you're referring your employees to are accredited. And this is, I can see Mohammed's question here. So finding a qualified and authorized person to provide that counseling can be tricky for an HR person. If you have the EAP, it's already done for you. And by the way, if you're sending your employees for private psychological intervention, the cost of sending, if you have, say, 500 employees, the cost of sending 2 or 3 people for private would probably cover your whole 500 employees for an EAP. Let's move on. What other ways can you get help? If you can't get psychological intervention or you don't have an EAP, look at other support systems. Support from family, social services, mental health teams, they have them in your country or region, and religious organizations. Many churches, mosques have mental health services available now, which they may not have in the past, or have links to people who can help. But it's also true at this time, turning to your normal support systems can be very helpful. So support services, also it's important for practical interventions. Many times people's mental health is made worse because of their concerns about housing, legal situations, financial concerns. If you can, make sure that people are financially feeling safe. If you can tell people about what's happening with their housing, this can actually lower the overall mental health impact on people. In some places, like the UK, they've brought in legislation to protect renters. The government is providing 80% of salary for furloughed employees, trying to help the self-employed whose income have dried up. All of these situations are very practical, but incredibly helpful. So if you're going through a mental health issue, or if you're finding yourself feeling very stressed or depressed, to also have on top of that legal or financial problems can be very damaging to people. It's also important when someone's going through a mental health crisis to look at exercise, diet, restricting their alcohol and drug use, social and recreational activities. You know, it's hard, probably when you're feeling depressed or stressed, anxious. You don't think like, well, I want to go for a walk or a run. You don't think about, I'm going to do an online game of chess. But in fact, all of these things help. Keeping your schedule as close to normal as possible. If you pray 5 times a day and you can't go to the mosque to do it and you have to do it at home, still keep up your systems. Routine helps people. But what also helps people, and there's no question about it, what also helps people is changing their lifestyle. You know, maybe this is the good time to start that diet or intermittent fasting or exercise routine that you've been putting off. This might be the time to do it. You know, someone told me last night that he was finally, after 40 years, going to learn the guitar, and he's found all these online YouTube videos on lessons on learning to play the guitar. And he said, am I crazy? I said, no, you're healthy. This is a wonderful thing to be doing at the moment because you're taking control of your life. Remember what we said at the very beginning. If you remember at the very beginning, we talked about what is a traumatic event. And it's about how everything has changed. Everything seems out of our control. Everything seems like we have and we don't have any control over the pandemic. Sure, we can stay home, social distance, do all those things, use hand gel, wash our hands, cough into a hanky or armpit. These are valid and great things to do, but that doesn't give us any control. We need to feel we have control. So taking control of your life at this stage can be incredibly helpful, and we strongly recommend that you do that. The last thing I want to mention is that for some mental health issues, medication can be helpful. Unfortunately, a lot of the literature shows that people are over-medicated. Sometimes general practitioners and other doctors who don't have enough training in mental health may feel that the only thing they can do is prescribe medication. If you don't have psychological help available immediately for people, like psychotherapy, you may feel that the only thing you can do is put them on medication, and then the people find they're trapped in a medication cycle. There is no doubt that for some psychological distress and for some mental health issues, medication will be helpful. But be very careful in this area, and it should always be prescribed by a psychiatrist or a health professional who is licensed to do that. So let's get to the summary, and then I'll see if there's any questions, and we'll finish up for the day. So what we've looked at today, what we've covered in today's session, is that mental health is exactly the same as our physical health. They're two sides to the same coin, and they are completely linked to each other. We unfortunately, particularly in the last 100 years, have made our mental health and our physical health seem like they're separate entities. And in many cultures, it's hard to talk or discuss mental health. We've looked at the impact of any crisis and trauma, and we've talked about how the current pandemic is definitely a shared worldwide crisis. We've talked about how to look after your mental health, and we came up with 10 tips. And we've talked about the value of support services, and for the employers here, I've mentioned employee assistance programs. So what I would like to do at the end, I'll put up my last slide, which I think is one to think about. For all of us who are going through this shared event, I want to share a quote which we believe is Persian in origin. It goes back many hundreds of years. It was first used in English language in 1840 when it was translated from the Persian. We don't really know who it was who said this. It was one of the ancient Persian philosophers. Let's have a look at what it says. This too shall pass. The coronavirus crisis will be over. We don't know how long. I saw that Bill Gates was saying that he thought that if everything is done right, it could possibly be by the beginning of summer. Who knows? I've heard other people say it could be over in weeks or months. Other people saying year or more. Whatever, we don't know. The truth is, though, it will pass, and everything will go back to the way it was before. Later on, we may run another webinar on what's going to happen when people return to work, because that's going to be a major issue for HR and managers. But remember, this will be over. So look after yourself, look after your family, look after your employees during this time. So let me go to the questions, and I'll have a look. Yes, Luke and a few others have mentioned about not diagnosing, absolutely important. So what can the employer do? I think we've covered a number of that. I think having an EAP in place is something that I would say an employer should be doing. Talking to your employees, maybe running something like this session for some of your key managers. We have a one-day training program we do online on mental health first aid, maybe putting some of your managers and HR people through that training so they can help others. And we cover a lot more detail than what we've covered today. That could be very helpful. I also think that talking to people, when people are working at home, be careful about how you're treating people. You know, the working at home is almost ironic to me, because I've been talking about the importance of home working for 20 years, and lots of employers have not wanted to do it. I think when this is over, we're going to find an increase in people demanding to work at home, because they found that it actually is useful. So let's see what else we've got here. Yeah, the zombie apocalypse, Phillips mentioned. Yeah, I mean, someone said to me the other day, the best quote I've heard about all of this is, it's like waking up into a bad episode of Doctor Who. And those who know Doctor Who will know what I'm talking about. It is a very strange experience. I think social withdrawal and isolation does have a huge challenge for people. We've covered some of that in this course. This webinar. We cover more in the longer course, but it's absolutely true that for many people, isolation, being quarantined can be very stressful. But remember what I said, people are complex and different. This will be on a continuum. I have to go that way. It'll be on a continuum. And this means that there'll be some people who will find it actually enjoyable to be isolated, through to those who will have a crisis, with most people being somewhere in the middle. So remember that people are different. Muhammad says it's Al-Biruni. Yep, very good, the Persian scientist. And what else should we say here? Yep, that's very good. Thank you for that, Muhammad. And how do people who are really isolated because they are going to be experiencing difficulties. But remember that even though you are in your house physically alone, we have telephones. We have video chats. I noticed that in the United Arab Emirates, they've listed the restrictions on some of the VoIP systems, so people can be talking to others. Try to set up schedules. Try to set up, but try to, if possible, make those discussions about something other than the coronavirus. There's nothing wrong with sharing your experiences and concerns, but try not to be focused in just the doom and gloom. I also think that people who are home alone and isolated, it's very important that we offer those people access to our HR and other support services. So HR people need to be making sure that they keep in contact with their employees and making sure that managers are keeping contact with their teams. So thank you, Mohammed from Iran. And let me see if I have any other questions here, because we're getting towards the end of the session. Yeah, how do you get employees to avoid concentrating on the doom and gloom and enhance their skills from the ER? Yeah, very good question. I think that try to keep things as normal as possible. I don't want to sound like I'm just selling something here, because I'm really not, but many people have stopped their training courses. Many people have stopped their meetings and group activities. This is a mistake, because bringing people together but giving them as normal work life as possible is important. So still having your regular team meetings, whether you're using software like Zoom or ClickMeeting or whatever you're using, those are vital important. Have your meetings as normal. If you are going to be offering training over the next few months, consider offering training online. Now, online training often has to be a bit shorter. It requires professionals who know how to do it, but people can still find that they're getting something. If you're requiring people to write reports, get them to still write reports, get them to still work. But I think it's also important to link employees up to things like webinars, link them up to other activities. So as much as possible, give people access to online learning, give them access to normal routine. Yep, Mohammed has mentioned motivational videos. Again, my only concern, I think it's a good idea, Mohammed, but remember that people are unique and complex. What one person finds motivating, another person finds demotivating. But, you know, there is definitely good apps out there. There are good programs. There are good videos. Make sure you screen these. Make sure you check them carefully. And again, look for professionals or through accredited bodies if possible, because times like this bring out the best in people. And I hate to say it, but it also brings out the worst. I've seen scams increase. I belong to a group that tries to look at online scams due to psychological interventions, and we've seen an increase in the last 2 weeks. This is terrible, but it's what's going to happen. Well, thank you, everyone. I've got a little survey for you to do. It's an evaluation of this session. There are only 3 questions. I'm going to try to get it to, this is the first time I've used this survey on here. So I'm going to put it up now. So if you wouldn't mind answering the few questions that we've put up, this will be very useful for us. And we're going to finish this webinar in a few minutes. Now, One thing to let you know, that the slides that I used will be available. Aztec will send those to you. And this webinar has been recorded. It's gone for an hour, and it will be available on the Aztec website. So you can send it to other people or show it to your employees. And if you would like more information, please contact us at any time. Thank you all so much for being part of this, our first coronavirus crisis time webinar. We will be having more. My good colleague, Gerald Bradley, will be running a session next week, and I strongly recommend you guys look at that. He's going to be looking at success and opportunity as a result of crisis. So Gerald's a world expert in that area, and I recommend attending his webinar if you can. Thank you all very much, and keep safe, keep following the guidances on social distancing, and hopefully we'll all be able to see each other in person again in the not too distant future. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much. We're going to close the webinar now. Keep safe, and goodbye all. Goodbye from the UK. Bye-bye.